So here's a chicken thigh, and the first thing you're going to want to do is remove the skin from the top. Makes it a lot easier if you freeze this ahead of time. Freezing it just makes it easier to pull the skin off and to take the fat off and trim it. So it comes off pretty easily, and then it kind of hits an edge right there. And if you want, you can just leave that there and you can deal with the skin like this, or you can rip the whole piece of skin off. I tend to like to rip the whole thing off because it's easier to work with. So we'll take that skin, and if you look here, the skin is really thick, and if you leave it that thick, then it'll get really rubbery on the cooker, especially if you're cooking low and slow at really low temperature. So one way to get around that is to shave some of this fat off of the back of the skin. And you do that by just scraping with a knife. And I like to just hold it with a piece of paper towel so it doesn't slip out of my hands. And then you just carefully scrape away. Try not to get a hole in the chicken skin. So we're just gently scraping, getting some of that fat off. And after you do this a few times, you'll get a good hang of how hard you can press so as to get most of the fat off, but not cut all the way through it. Okay, and once you can start sort of seeing through the chicken skin, that's the point you want to get to. See, I can sort of see the cutting board underneath it. And then once you're there, it gets a lot easier to scrape the rest of the fat off. Okay, now I've got this side done quite well, so I'm going to flip it over and get the rest of it. And we're going to turn our attention back to the chicken thigh. So the first thing we want to do is remove all this extra fat. Fat isn't really looked at very fondly in KCBS BBQ competitions on chicken thighs. So we want to remove as much of it as we can. And I kind of use a combination of my knife and my scissors to do that. So we'll trim off all this fat. And even if you trim a bit of the meat off, that's fine. You have to sacrifice as much meat as you need to do to get a great final product. So we'll snip that off. And there's another big ridge of fat here that we'll snip off. And there's kind of some silver skin or something here. All these little raggedy edges are good to snip off as well. Try to get rid of this. There we go. And you can actually use your hands sometimes to remove a lot of this fat, or just a piece of paper towel to grip onto it. Okay, that should be good for the fat. Now we're going to look at this little knuckle here. There's a knuckle on the edge of the thigh, and it's basically a big bone that sticks out beyond the meat. And then there's a big chunk of cartilage here at the joint. So we want to remove that by using our garden shears to snip that off. Otherwise, this bone, when the meat starts peeling back after it cooks, is going to stick out, and it's not going to look very pretty. And you'll probably lose points based on appearance. So then we want to take this cartilage out, because this cartilage is not edible. Or at least it's not very tasty. So we'll get rid of that. And now we've got something that looks a little bit more like a competition chicken breast. At this point, if you were at the competition, you would start to put your rub on this side of the meat that's going to be underneath the skin. Then you'd layer your skin on top. But I'm just trimming all of my chicken ahead of time because you can't pre-season any of your meat before a barbecue competition, at least under KCBS rules. So now we'll go back to our chicken skin, And we're going to drape it over. Okay, I can see I've got a bit of a hole there, but it's not really noticeable. So I'll try to get that as much to the side as possible so it's not really as noticeable when it's done cooking. And I'll try to cover all this up as best I can. And if you want to, you can snip away this part because you won't need it. But for now, I'm just going to leave that on because I think it'll help it form a lot better. So there we go. Now we just shape it into a nice little pillow shape and try to make it as uniform as possible. And then at this point, you would stick it into a baking dish and you would put all of the similarly trimmed chicken breasts next to each other and cook it for the competition. And that will help it form as well.